welcome for being here in the February 21 meeting of Life After Life on Zoom. And I really want to thank especially Alan Slipson and his wife for helping us get a Zoom production going. And thank you to Neil McNeil for the extra time he put in here. We couldn't have done this without him, because I really was hopeful to get something going. We've tried to get Neil here at least twice times. So I'm glad we can finally have them here and his pictures. After he presents, he will be opening it up for questions, and it's going to be kind of a new thing for all of us, how that's going to work. So let him give you some introduction too when he's ready for taking questions. I also want to mention Catherine, who's no longer with us, but her spirit's always with us. She was a joyful, joyful person, but she left us in January. So that's kind of why we're all brand new here, talking about it this way. Neil McNeil has been in parapsychological research forever, looks like, ever since he's gone to school, and it's all been in Washington State, and he has some wonderful places to work with, and he happens to feel very strongly about the hauntings and the happenings at Port Gamble. I believe that's exactly what he's going to talk about. He has quite a resume. He's done a lot of studying in parapsychology. He's also done healing classes. He's also a very sensitive person. So I think we'll all enjoy this presentation. So without any more ado, I want to introduce you to Neil McNeil. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
And I want to say thank you, Marion, for setting all of this up. And of course, I'm sorry to hear about Catherine, but I want to thank her as well, because 2 years ago, she was the one who contacted me to come and talk for you all. So I'm very pleased to be able to do this, because we had a series of setbacks. I think the first time it was a snowstorm that took out the Amtrak line.
Yep.
So I wasn't able to come down. And then we tried for December of this year. That didn't work. And here we are today. So I will warn everybody that up here in Seattle, we are under a wind advisory today. So if the screen goes blank, the ghosts didn't get me, the power company did. And we'll do our best to do this. So thanks everybody for joining me. I know it's early for you, and apparently it's a beautiful day down there in Southern California. I've been seeing outside some people's windows. I kind of miss the sun up here in Seattle. So enjoy it for me while you can down there. Thanks for joining us. And we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart. That's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. As Marion said, this is kind of new for all of us. I'm actually used to doing Zoom meetings, but I've never done this with so many people and a PowerPoint presentation slideshow at the same time. So hopefully everybody will be able to see what's going on. And I do have some audio clips and video clips to share with people as well. So when it comes time to actually listen to those audio clips, this would be clips of what are known as EVP, or electronic voice phenomena. Some of them are a little bit low. So if you have headphones, or if you want to turn up your speakers, then you'll be able to probably hear things a little bit better, but I'll let you know when those things are coming up. So I suppose I should just really start things off with a bit of an introduction. I have been in the field of paranormal investigation and parapsychological education since about 1993. I had the really good fortune of meeting a gentleman by the name of Lloyd Auerbach. And for some of you, I'm sure you might know Lloyd's name. He was kind of the original Ghostbuster back in the 1980s. And he wrote the book on ghost busting back at that time, before it became the socially acceptable thing to do that it is today. Lloyd is a parapsychologist, and parapsychology, for those of you who don't know, is actually the science that studies psychic phenomena, or ghostly phenomena in my case. I had no idea that there was an actual science that studied these kinds of things. So when I met Lloyd, it was an eye-opening experience, and I knew what I wanted to do, if at all possible, was to be able to get in on this field in any way that I could. So while I don't consider myself to be a parapsychologist, that is, I don't hold a degree in parapsychology, you haven't actually been able to do that. And since the early 1990s, you have to go abroad in order to get a degree in parapsychology these days. I have worked in the field ever since then, both in self-study and, as I said, in education. And mainly, the thrust of what I have done is going out in the field and examining and investigating reports of haunted houses, or at least reported reports of haunted houses. A lot of people, probably the biggest question that I get is, aren't you scared when you go out and do these kinds of things? And actually, no, I'm one of those foolhardy folks. I'm actually fascinated by all of these very, very interesting phenomena that happen. I am a believer in life after life for a number of reasons. And as Marion said earlier, I'm also a healer. I actually just recently opened up a new business in tarot card reading. So I have one foot very firmly in science and scientific methodology and objectivity, and I have one foot very solidly in belief and faith and subjectivity and all those kinds of wonderful things. So I try to juggle those as best I can, and you're going to get a little bit of both of those worlds today. What I'd like to do with the time that we have is to introduce you to one of my favorite places on the face of the earth, actually literally one of my favorite haunts. We're going to be taking you to a place called the Walker Ames Mansion, or simply the Walker Ames House, in a small town outside of Seattle called Port Gamble. If you're familiar with the Seattle area, this is way out on the coast. I've got some maps for you that I'll show you just exactly where we're talking about, so you don't have to visualize too much, but it's sort of out in the middle of proverbial nowhere. And it's this little historic mill town. It used to be a timber mill town that has gotten quite a reputation for being very paranormally active. And I'm not really talking about the kind of paranormal activity that you see on television or read in a Stephen King novel. It's far more subtle than that, and probably much more interesting. And I'm going to introduce you to as many of the ghosts that live in the Walker Ames house as I possibly can today. At last count, we had at least 10 distinct personalities that have appeared in the house over time. So there's a lot to actually talk about. One of the things that makes Port Gamble and the Walker Ames house very unique, actually there's several things that make it very unique. Number one, it's an historic town. So very little has changed physically in the town ever since it was founded back in the 1850s. And I think that goes a long way to explaining why some of this activity might be continue to be reported after all of this time, because very little has actually physically changed in the town. It's a picture postcard sort of slice of New England life right here in the Pacific Northwest, and it really does look the part. So that's one of the things that makes this town really unique. One of the other things is that the local residents are very fond of their ghosts and of the activity that has been reported in the town over this past several decades. And they're actually rather protective of those ghosts too. I don't usually find that in my case studies. When people call me up, they want to get rid of a ghost. And in this particular case, they want to keep them and they want to find out all about them. So that's sort of a unique opportunity there. And probably the third, and to my way of thinking, most important thing about Port Gamble and the Walker Ames house, from my point of view as a researcher, is that it has afforded me and others the opportunity to have a case study in the field long term. And by long term, I mean I've been investigating at Port Gamble since late 2003. The investigations continue to this day. So that's a very long period of time. We sort of get a real sense of who's there, what the activity is, what the reports are historically versus what's being experienced now. It's a really wonderful opportunity that I've had to be able to study these phenomena up close in as controlled a setting as possible in the field, and to do it over time and really get to know not just the town itself, but the ghosts and who we think they might be. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Let me introduce you to the house itself. Hopefully you can see this. This is the Walker Ames Mansion. It sits on a bluff in the town that overlooks Gamble Bay, a beautiful deep water port. And as you can see from this photo, this is sort of, because it's in black and white, it looks like the quintessential haunted house. It's almost like you're looking at the Addams Family house or something along those lines. It's actually, the Walker Ames house really does look the part, both outside and inside. As you'll see later on, the house has not been occupied since 1990. So that's a very long time. It's actually been unoccupied for all this time, no furnishings in the house to speak of, but it's very well maintained and very well kept up. So when we look at the house, the first time that I was introduced to it, I thought, well, if any house in town that I've ever examined or investigated could be haunted, it would probably be this one. It's a very charming four-story gingerbread Victorian in the Queen Anne style. Let me give you another view here, a modern view, so you can see the color scheme and that the town really is very serious about its historic roots and wanting to maintain the buildings that are here in town. I'm just going to give you a brief outline at this point of how all of this came to be. How is it that I stumbled upon Port Gamble? I wasn't just driving through and said, this place is haunted, I must go and see. It actually happened a little more pragmatically than that. I was a member of a small investigation group here in the Seattle area known as the Evergreen Paranormal Group. And of course, we would get the usual emails and phone calls, inquiries of people who thought that they had paranormal activity in their homes or their places of business, and we would go out and we would do our investigations. It turned out that one day we received a phone call from Shanna Smith. Now, Shanna was the property manager of a little town that I had never heard of, Port Gamble, way out on the Olympic Peninsula. And she had a very interesting proposition. She had worked in the town for many, many years before becoming the property manager. And over the years that she was managing the entire town, she noticed that several of her tenants, both commercial and private tenants in town, had stories that they would tell her while they were either living or working in town, or especially as they were giving up their lease and moving out of town. They would share stories with her about odd goings on, about hearing voices in the middle of the night, about hearing footsteps upstairs or downstairs, about seeing ghostly images of gentlemen crossing the street and then disappearing, of strange lights and all kinds of interesting things going on throughout town, which, when I heard about this, was rather unique, because I thought, well, that's very interesting. We have an entire town that seems to have activity associated with it. And in point of fact, the first time that I went out there, we figured 14 of the public buildings in town had reports of activity. And as it turns out, at rough estimate at this point, probably between 80 to 85% of the buildings, both commercial buildings and private residences, have had some kind of activity associated with them, as we found out later on. So that was very, very intriguing. The other thing that she had done, she had great presence of mind in doing this, was when we went out to actually begin the investigation, after we agreed that this sounded like a really interesting opportunity, I met her and she handed us this. She handed us what is, as you can see, basically a small phone book worth of reports that, as the property manager in town, she had collected. And she had done this very, very smartly. She had done it by the building. She had done it chronologically. She had names. and the types of activity that had been associated with it. So it was an amazing resource for us to have to refer to. We called this ended up being called the Bible, the Port Gamble Bible, and we still refer to it to this day. We've added to it as our investigations have continued. So again, I knew that we had a very, very special opportunity because we had someone in charge of a town that wasn't just haunted, but seemingly very haunted, and who was also actively interested in having a scientific investigation done of the town. She was very selective about who she was sharing this information with, and actually we were the very first people to come in and do investigations. The first building in town that we investigated was the Walker Ames house, because she said this seemed to be the one particular building that had the most amount of activity that she had heard of over the years. So that was our first investigation. And the very first year that we were there, we investigated 20 plus buildings in town, just in the first year, from 2003 to 2004. And that number has grown, obviously, since then. Other groups have come in over the years, other individuals. It's become so popular, actually, Port Gamble as a town, and the Walker Ames house in particular, that it has been, it now has the distinction of being known as the most haunted town in Western Washington. And we have an annual ghost conference that happens there. We were so interested in what was going on that we wanted to share that with people. And again, we wanted to do it very responsibly. As I mentioned, I'm all about education and parapsychology. So I wanted to make sure that somehow or another, we sort of circumvented all the stuff that you see on television, all the cable television shows and those kinds of things, which don't give an accurate picture of what paranormal investigation is like. And so that's what we have endeavored to do. And that's what I'm going to share with you today, the scientific side of the investigations that we've been doing here. So again, this sort of became my laboratory in the field. Really amazing opportunity that came along. I will tell you that the investigations that I have done in the classes, I teach college level classes in the fundamentals of parapsychology. And as part of that class, over the years, I take students out into the field to different locations around Puget Sound and let them do an investigation, and do it using the scientific method and the protocols that we have in place. So to that end, we have forms that we use. These are all standardized. The students are very serious about what they do. These are not, basically what I'm saying is that these investigations are not just, an excuse to have a tailgate party in the graveyard, although those are very fun. That's not what we're actually doing. So they have things like floor plans, maps that they use. They have adjective lists that are taken from scientific journals that we do. So this is a very detailed investigative process that we're doing. And that's how it continues to be done today with the current management of the town. So what I'd love to do, just before I take you inside the house, because you're going to get an insider's view of what this haunted house actually looks like and feels like, I want everybody to be on the same page. Now, I'm not going to teach you much about parapsychology, but I do want to talk about the two types of phenomena that we generally have when we're investigating in the field, and the types of phenomena that we actually experience in the house. So in parapsychology, when we're talking about ghostly experiences, all those ghostly types of phenomena, we generally break things down into two major groups. And the first group is known as haunt phenomena or hauntings. And we use that term very, very specifically. A lot of people, if you read books, you watch the programs on television, you'll see that they're almost interchangeable. It's a haunted house. That can mean a lot of things to a parapsychologist. So just to get the terminology down, this is what we have when we're talking about haunt phenomena. Essentially, we're talking about a historical recording on the environment, okay? Sometimes it's thought of as a place memory. You can think of it as if there's this particular room or this particular house, this particular plot of land has held on to an echo of some event that happened in the past, and it's kind of stuck onto the environment. And under the right circumstances, under the right situations, it will replay itself over and over again. So in essence, what you're doing is it's like when you experience haunting phenomena, it's almost like walking into a movie theater in the middle of the fourth reel. You're just getting a little snippet of something that went on a year ago, 10 years ago, 100 years ago. Hauntings can take place over a long period of time. These are often tied to emotional events, either very positive events or very negative events. And they repeat with great consistency and with great regularity. The things that you can experience with a haunting may involve seeing the figure of someone going through emotion, going through walking across a room, setting a table. Sometimes it's very benign, mundane kinds of things. Sometimes it's actually seeing a suicide replayed. Sometimes with battlefields, you actually get to see the entire battle replayed. This happens at Gettysburg. So that's what a haunting actually is. The main ingredient in a haunting that lets you know that that is what it is that these events do not interact with you. So if you're in the middle of a haunting and you say hello to a figure that you see, or you try to involve yourself in what's going on, it will just ignore you. Just as the movie would continue to play, if you walked into the movie theater, it's not going to interact with you. So that's how we know what haunt phenomena actually are. And we do have examples of this that happen in the Walker Ames house. And then secondly, we have apparitions. You notice that I didn't call them ghosts. The term ghost actually has a lot of baggage associated with it. It's not a very neutral term. It has a lot of negative connotations. And so parapsychologists, when we're talking about ghosts, we like to use a more neutral term, that being apparitions. Now, a parapsychologist by the name of G.N.M. Tyrrell actually categorized ghosts, or apparitions as he termed them, and he came up with 4 different kinds of apparitions. He had crisis apparitions, and he had deathbed visions or deathbed visitations, and there were apparitions of the living, like an out-of-body experience or bilocation. But the one that everybody's really familiar with, and the one that we're all here to hear about, is the 4th category, and that's probably the most complex one, and that is what we call postmortem apparitions. So these are the real ghosts. Postmortem apparitions, if you were to experience one, this particular apparition almost assuredly would be appearing more than 12 hours after the death of the person. Whereas with some other apparitions, the person is still alive and just projecting themselves out of their body, or in a moment of crisis, or has just died. But with a postmortem, as the name suggests, more than 12 hours after death. With this particular type of apparition, they exhibit a lot of behavior that matches what they had in life. So in other words, there's a distinct personality, distinct behaviors and mannerisms, and they have both free will, so they can think for themselves and make their own decisions. And they are interactive. They will actually interact with you. And in fact, it seems, in my experience, that most apparitions do want to interact. They actually are trying to get your attention in most cases. Contrary to popular culture and what you read in Stephen King novels and all that sort of thing, these are not the wispy, shadowy types of ghosts. Most, not all, but most apparition reports are of solid looking figures. And in fact, most of them are mistaken for a real person. And you don't know that you've actually been interacting with a ghost until they walk through a wall or they just dematerialize in front of your eyes. So imagine doing that or having that experience. I tend to believe that because of that, almost everyone has experienced or interacted with a postmortem apparition at some point in their lives. They just didn't know about it because it didn't disappear right in front of their eyes. So chances are you've already experienced an apparition at some point. These are not the scary experiences that the media tend to make out to us. They're comforting, they're low key, they're very calm, not scary. That's really not the hallmark of apparition experiences. Again, contrary to popular belief, you're just as likely to see or experience an apparition during the daytime as you are at night. So it's a 50-50 chance. It doesn't have to be a dark and stormy night, and it doesn't have to be midnight. And one of the interesting hallmarks of apparitions, again, sort of counter to what the popular idea would be, oftentimes a ghost will cast a shadow, will have full parallax. So that means you can walk around them and see them from every angle. They sometimes cast reflections in mirrors. Almost never do you hear a report of a ghost with feet. I'm not sure if that's because as people, we don't look down and look at people's feet all that often. We're sort of concentrating on their face and shoulders, but very often we don't get reports of feet, and we never really hear ghosts of being naked. We don't really get reports of nude ghosts running around, unless you have a haunted nudist colony, which I've never run into myself, and hopefully I never will. But those are just some interesting facts that we have about apparitions, so that we can now understand what the difference is. So as I start talking to you and showing you and giving you evidence for what I have discovered and found in Port Gamble and the Walker Ames house specifically, you can make your own decisions as to whether these are haunting phenomena or more interactive apparition types. Something to keep in mind. So here we go. I'm going to introduce you to Port Gamble. Welcome. This is an historic town that has been a mill town, a timber mill town, out on the Olympic Peninsula in Western Washington since 1853. This is the sign that greets you as you drive into town. You have to take a ferry in order to get there, so you got to cross the water of Puget Sound in order to get to this wonderful little town. It's a little jog in the highway. And there's the town. It's small enough that you can walk across it in about 10 minutes time, 10 or 15 minutes time, and see everything. And it's very charming, very, very much in the New England style. So here we are with our location. You can see here, for those of you not familiar with Washington State, I don't blame you. We're up here in the corner of the country. Why would you look up here? We have Seattle over here, which everybody pretty much is familiar with. So you actually do have to cross the water or drive all the way around the peninsula and upwards in order to get to Port Gamble, which sits here right on the Hood Canal Peninsula, or the Olympic Peninsula. This map is taken from the turn of the century, or actually I should say from 1919, a little bit past that. And you can see it would be a really big deal at that time, at the turn of the century. If you wanted to get to Port Gamble, you had to have a reason to be there. This wasn't just something that you were going to stumble across or go to on a day drive or something like that. You really had to want to go there. Here is a little map of the town itself and its layout. It really is not much larger than this. Most of the buildings in town are historic, and probably half of them are from Port Gamble itself. The other buildings in town have been taken from other mill towns in the area, because there are several. We've got a lot of timber up here, big history of that. And when those mills closed down, oftentimes they would take the residential buildings from those and put them onto a barge and barge them across the water and drop them off at Port Gamble, and they'd be set up. Why waste a perfectly good building? Give you a couple of historic photos here so you can see what Port Gamble, and indeed the Walker Ames house, would have looked like back in the day. This town was founded by the Pope and Talbot Company. They were a very large East Coast timber mill company that had their headquarters on the West Coast in San Francisco. And in 1853, they sent ships up and down the West Coast looking for areas to set up more mill towns. Port Gamble, because of that, now has the distinction of being the longest running timber mill in US history. 142 years, 142 continuous years. And a lot of the timber that came from Port Gamble, from up here in the Pacific Northwest, has gone around the world, to China, to Japan, to South Africa, to South America. And in fact, a lot of San Francisco that was rebuilt after the '06 quake and fire was built with Port Gamble timber. So there's a lot of Port Gamble in San Francisco. You can see the waterfront here where the logs would be waiting. You can see inside the mill itself. At its height, there were actually three mills on the site turning out timber consecutively. So they were running all at the same time. It's a really nice view from 1913 of the waterfront and the mill site here in this particular area, with some of the buildings that are still here in town. You can see right here the post office building here. You can see a five-star hotel, of all things, in this timber mill town, a five-star hotel known as the Puget Hotel, back by the bluff. You can see the hospital building that sits right in front of our quarry here, what we're going to be looking at, the Walker Ames Mansion. There are some other buildings in town I'd like to introduce you to, just very, very briefly, all of which are haunted themselves, all of which I have investigated. They had a beautiful church that was built, St. Paul's Episcopal, built in 1879, still there today. Lovely place to have a wedding if you don't mind the ghosts joining you. We have the community hall and the theater. This was sort of a multi-purpose building. Again, this is still there, built in 1906. This housed not only the community theater, the library, social events. There was eventually a projectionist's booth, and they would show movies here back when that was a big thing. It held the post office, office space, and most spookily, the town morgue actually is in the basement of the building. We have the general store, this one in particular built in 1916. So you can kind of get an idea that Port Gamble is an historic town. They've kept it up pretty well. They really like the history of it. And it's very much New England in its look and its feel. So now we come to what is the most ornate and fancy building in town. The Walker Ames Mansion was initially, it was never called that, obviously, to begin with. This was intended to be the building that housed the mill manager. So naturally, this was going to be the largest, most spacious, most well-appointed building in the town. It sat on the bluff. It had the best view of the water, of the ships coming in and going out. And again, the largest and prettiest building in town. This is not the first structure, though, to be built on this particular location. There was the previous mill manager's house that we know virtually nothing about. There are no photos that have survived to this point. All we know is that it burned down in 1887, 1888, somewhere around there. And so obviously they needed to rebuild and do that very quickly. And one of the things that they did at the time was kind of like going to the Sears and Roebuck catalog. You went to Scientific American if you wanted to build a lovely Victorian mansion. I'm not sure why. I wish it was still that way, that you could just open up a really lovely scientific publication, point to a house and say, for $3,500, I want that floor plan. But that's exactly what happened with the Walker Ames house. This is from Scientific American. I actually have a copy of this book. This used to come out every couple of decades. They would publish all kinds of illustrations of houses that you could choose from and their floor plans. And you plunk down your money and they sent you the kit. Basically, it was a do-it-yourself mansion. So this particular floor plan was really popular on the East Coast. These were, as you can see, two dwellings in Orange, not Orange of Orange County, but Orange, New Jersey. And so this was a very popular floor plan in the year that they needed a floor plan for this mill manager's house. So they decided this would be the one. So with very few alterations to the original floor plan, this is what the Walker Ames house actually was intended to look like inside. So I thought this was kind of a fun thing to show you. This is what they did. They put it up, they built it over the winter of 1887, 1888, and it has remained there since that time. The reason that it's known as the Walker Ames house is because of the two families that lived in the house originally. The mill manager was not married. He did not have a family, and he didn't feel that he needed such a large house to knock around in, especially when he was actually down at the mill site all day and most of the night, because they ran 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So it was the chief machinist and his wife who actually moved into the house. And then later, when the mill manager married, he and his new wife moved in with them. So you had two couples sharing the one house for about 10 years, actually, until about 1900. So that's where we get the name the Walkers and the Ameses, the Walker Ames house. So from historical photos, I'm going to take you on a little tour around the outside of the house and then head for the inside. This is actually taken from the water side. So if you were visiting Port Gamble, you would have come in by water. You would have come in on one of the tall ships that was docking, probably to take on lumber or drop off supplies. And so this is the side of the house that you would have seen. Very impressive. Again, it's up on a bluff, so you had to climb up the hill in order to get there. And you enter through this beautiful porch with all this gingerbread around it. And you walk through these beautiful stained glass window adorned doors to get there. So this was actually the important person's side of the house. As we come around now, the view from the south end, can see just how big this house actually is with the pitch of the roof and everything. You've got a basement level, you have a main level, you have a second floor, and then you've got a very spacious attic to explore and work around in here. So there was a lot of space, and of course you needed servants in order to keep a house this large running. Now, if you lived in town and you were visiting the folks living here at the house, this is the side of the house that you would have seen, the street side, the boring side, as they called it. You would have gone through, more than likely, the door on the right-hand side. That actually leads to the kitchen area. So a very informal way of entering the house. But at the same time, it also meant that you were pretty much welcome anytime, and you knew the folks there, and it was okay for you to come in. Many people have lived in this building. It has actually been set up as a boarding house for several years. I think in the 60s and into the 70s, it was actually divided up into separate rooms. So many people lived in the house, almost like a small apartment building, if you will. And this is actually one of my favorite views of the house. This is from the north side. You can see all the beautiful stained glass that was imported, brought over from the East Coast on the new Transcontinental Railroad, which is one of the reasons why they were able to build this house and have it be so ornate, because they could get all the supplies trucked in from the East Coast. It didn't have to be on a ship and go around the tip of South America and come back up. So as we go inside to the house, I'm going to show you a little bit more here. If you were an important person, if you were one of those people that was coming by boat, you would come through those beautiful stained glass doors into the main hall, or the entry hall. You'd be greeted with this incredibly ornate fireplace. There are many of these throughout the house. It takes a lot of wood to keep a house like this warm. And so this is where you would have been greeted and told to wait until the master or the lady of the house came to receive you in the parlor. You can just see off to the right-hand side of this fireplace into what would be the dining room area. And on the left-hand side is a servant's hallway that leads into the kitchen. Still standing in the entry hall, if you turn to your right, you can see this gorgeous carved wood staircase with all these beautifully turned balustrade. And again, all of this lovely stained glass that sits above these beautiful panes with color. Gets so much light for such a large house and a Victorian style where the rooms are actually fairly small. this particular floor plan, things were fairly open and you have a lot of light in this house. So even though it looks from the outside sort of like the quintessential haunted house, on the inside, it looks much friendlier. I've never had anyone be scared of this house as they've been doing investigation or been invited inside. In fact, most people end up falling in love with this house in spite of the fact that it has so many ghosts here. I'll point out this little thing, this little feature right here, sitting on top of the newel post at the turnaround. This is actually a electrical outlet or electrical light that was installed. Believe it or not, even though it was out in the middle of nowhere, Port Gamble got electricity before much of Seattle did. It's kind of an interesting little fact. So the Walker Ames house was lit with electricity long before most of the expensive houses up on Capitol Hill in Seattle would have been. Here's a shot of that kitchen, very large kitchen area for a very large household with all of the amenities, a very wide sink with a drain board. And I love that bell on the door. It's one of the original old crank style bells that you have on that door. No electricity here for that. As we move upstairs to the living quarters, this is what would have greeted you in the master bedroom. Very beautiful room, full of light. It has its own little balcony. Beautiful thing, and this incredible carved and mirrored fireplace, firebox here. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. So you can really get an idea, and actually the wallpaper that you see here, that is original to around the turn of the century of 1915. That is not modern. A lot of those little touches exist in the house, so it's really quite a lovely historical curiosity that we have here. Okay, so just as I wanted to give you a little bit of a tour to kind of orient you, see what we're dealing with when we're talking about these rooms and the beauty that is the house. It's a very charming thing, despite the fact that it has all of these kinds of phenomena associated with it. So before I get into it, some of the things that I have noticed in all of my years of investigation here. One very, very interesting fact, we know that reports of activity in the house are not just modern, they go back to at least the 1950s. We know that we have verbal interviews, we've got interviews with people who actually lived in the house, grew up in the house, and would corroborate what we knew at this point, that they experienced phenomena in the house as well, not having known that the house was haunted. They just grew up in it. They would have experiences with some of the apparitions. They would have objects be moved. They would have light flashes and all kinds of things. Exactly the same kind of stuff that we find here in the 2000s. So very, very interesting to be able to have that sort of long amount of time as a view, that we can kind of look at these things as if they're on a scale. In the years that I've investigated the house, one of the things that I found to be rather interesting is that the activity seems to run in cycles. And what I mean by that is that it's almost like, well, what's the phenomenon du jour? This particular year, it's hair tugging. A lot of people in the house feel that somebody's touching their hair or actually tugging on their hair in very specific areas of the house. And so maybe that goes for a year or a year and a half, and then that fades away. Then we get light phenomena or luminous phenomena. Suddenly we're getting flashes of light in the parlor or in the basement, little light shows happening throughout the house. And that goes on for maybe 6 months. The phenomena sort of, it's almost like they're taking turns. It's almost like you're peeling back layers of history, of activity, and then they'll come back again. So maybe after 2 or 3 years, the hair tugging comes back or the light phenomena comes back. So I've personally found that to be very, very interesting. Another thing that people describe, again, who have no prior knowledge of the house, they're in the house for the first time, they don't necessarily realize that it's paranormally active. They say that there's a shift that happens in the house. Now, whether you believe in energy or not, these are anecdotal things, comments that people bring up. It's obviously very subjective, but I can't tell you the number of times that people have turned to me when I've been in the house at sunset, as the sun goes down, and somebody will say, did you feel that the energy of the house just changed? It went from being sort of this peaceful, historic building to all of a sudden I'm feeling really jumpy, and it just feels like there's an electrical charge in the house. And indeed there does. A lot of people describe it as being like an electrical buzz. That happens constantly in the house. I haven't really run into that in many other locations that I've investigated over the last 25 years or so. As I mentioned earlier, there are distinct apparitional personalities in the house. We have distinct ghosts in the house. There is, we've named them as best we can. We don't really know their proper names. They aren't talking to us in those terms. We're not on those friendly terms at this point. But there is a person up on the second floor we call the surly man, or the surly gentleman, who has a real attitude. And he seems to like to hide behind door frames and peek out at people when they walk through the house on the second floor. We have photographic evidence of this. We have people who have seen this independently reported. I've seen the gentleman. In point of fact, he actually ends up looking like he's backlit. He's sort of in shadow. Not that he's a shadowy figure, but just that he's in shadow when he is seen. There is a lady of the house. She is seen both in the attic and down on the main floor in the parlor. There is the maid. We have a housekeeper in the building who wears a dark industrial gray sort of turn of the century period maid's outfit, complete with the breast cover and the pinny that goes over that. And she has white hair. She looks for all the world, I've seen her myself, she looks for all the world like Mrs. White from the old Clue board game. If you ever played the board game, looks dead ringer for Mrs. White. This is exactly who I associate this with. So I have to be careful when I'm talking to her not to call her Mrs. White. And she will follow people around the house. I've taken groups of students through the house on a tour before investigations. This has happened 3 times. And at the end of the tour, just before we're ready to set up for the investigation, 1 or 2 students will come to me and ask who this woman in the maid's uniform was, who was following about 10 feet behind. She was following the group throughout the house, and they wanted to know who she was and why she was there for the investigation. And of course, I get to smile and say, there is no one here that matches that description. And then they go away scratching their heads, that sort of thing. There is someone in the basement. This is probably one of the more infamous people. I ran into this gentleman in my first visit. He really likes the basement for some reason, one very particular corner of the basement. He doesn't travel around. We've gotten his laughter on audio recordings. He does not seem to do well with the lady folk. He seems to like to push them, or in some cases slap them. We've actually had women in the basement slapped. A film crew that was filming a motion picture in the house had their film stuff set up in the basement, and one of the actresses in the middle of a take reacted as if being slapped on her backside and tried to play that into the scene. And when they yelled cut, she said, something slapped me. She said, I don't know if I'm having a Charlie horse or a cramp or something like that. And I've seen a photograph of the back of her thigh, and there is a handprint in red on the area. It's quite interesting. This doesn't happen to all women that are down there, but many ladies who are in the basement, the minute that they get down the stairs, become nauseated. I've actually had people have to leave the building before they can come back in. This never is reported by the gentleman. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with nerves. So I'm in a haunted house, I'm very nervous, this is anxiety. It comes on very, very suddenly, very, very unexpectedly. So interesting personages in the house, and they are there from the very minute that I walked in the house to this very day. They like to take turns, but I know them pretty well. So if you ever happen to be in the Seattle area, look me up and we might be able to introduce you to a few of them. So I've got here on the screen a list of the reported types of phenomena. So we have noises and voices. Everybody's kind of heard of those kinds of things. The noises that we have in the house are very interesting. Footsteps are very, very common. In point of fact, it's almost a joke. It's almost a running joke, literally a running joke, that I will have a group of people in the house, or we're finishing up doing an investigation, and I generally gather people in the kitchen area on the first floor before we leave and lock the building up. And it is usually at that time, we'll have been in the house for 3 hours at that point. And just as we're getting ready to leave, we'll start to hear people running upstairs, running down from the head of the stairs, down the hall and into the master bedroom. And you could hear it quite clearly, a gentleman's footsteps. They're very heavy footfalls. I wouldn't expect a lady's footfalls to sound like this. And people's eyes will get very wide and they'll look up at the ceiling, and that's how I know that they've heard it too. So running upstairs for some reason, or footsteps walking around just in a circle around the open floor plan on the second floor. And again, almost always as we're getting ready to leave. And of course, we'll go upstairs and there'll be nobody there. Also too, up on the second floor and in the attic, we have the sounds of furniture being moved, large heavy objects being dragged or scraped across the floor. And these are all wooden floors, and there's nothing in this building. So the resonance in the building is quite amazing. You get quite an echo in the building. You really hear it. It's a definite audio signal of furniture being moved. We've had lots of reports of the sounds of doors being slammed or drawers being forcefully shut. And again, we go upstairs and everything is in its place. Nothing has been shut. Nothing's been moved or anything like that. Singing is also heard in the house, usually female singing. We can never quite get the tune. We can never quite get the words. We do have recordings of this, but either singing or whistling is heard in the house at various times. And again, these are on the upper floors, usually when somebody's on the bottom level. We get electrical disruptions and malfunctions. If you follow stories of haunted houses and investigations, or you watch some of the television programs, the famous battery drain, or your equipment refuses to work when you're in a haunted location. That actually is a real phenomenon. I have no idea why that is, but it is especially true in the basement of the Walker Ames house. Now I know that with colder temperatures, especially moving from warmer climate down into a damp, dank basement, that can have an effect on the batteries and cause them to cease to function. But it happens with a little too much regularity, that you get electrical disruption of the actual functioning of the device. So if we've got audio recorders, if we've got video recorders, if we have background temperature sensors, radiation sensors, all those kinds of things should not all malfunction at the same time. And in point of fact, they actually do. So very, very interesting thing that happens there. We also get interesting electrical effects with the lights in the house. One of my favorite stories is one of the first stories that I've heard about the Walker Ames house activity. And that was from Shanna Smith herself, the property manager. She used to tell me stories that her office was on one side of the town and she lived on the other. So she would drive through town. She'd be working late at night, maybe midnight, 1 in the morning. She'd drive through town and she has to pass by the house in order to get home. And there would be one light, one single light on in the attic room, knowing she's the only one that's got the keys to the house as the property manager, and she knows that nobody's in the house. So she would have to park the car in the dead of night, unlock the house by herself, walk through the house up to the attic, turn off the light. And this light was one of the old style lights where you have to crank it 180 degrees. This is not something that can just accidentally go on by itself. And then walk down through a dark house, lock it up, and go home for the night and try to get a good night's sleep. She used to tell me that used to happen quite a lot. And that light still does go on by itself once in a while. We have checked the wire and we've had electricians in the house, and there's no real reason that we can find why that would be. We get luminous phenomena. Speaking of lights, luminous phenomena refers to strange balls of light, flashes of light, anything that is not produced by a man-made electrical light source. One of the most amazing things that I have ever seen happened twice to myself. I actually experienced this on 2 locations in the basement of the house, where we had basically what amounted to a fireworks display. I had no fewer than a dozen students in the basement with me at night, after dark, no lights on down there, and small quarter to $half sized balls of bluish white light started exploding out of one corner of the basement and zipping around in midair and on the floor and interacting with people. It was one of the most extraordinary things that I've ever experienced as an investigator. It was almost like, you know, if you live in the South, you have fireflies, right, in the warmer climes. It was almost like experiencing interaction. It was almost like they were responding to our movements or our verbal commands or conversation. Really extraordinary. It happened twice. Those particular occasions were about a year apart, and I did find out that it happened once more to another gentleman I know who leads investigations in the house. So again, something that we've investigated that's happened over a period of time, rather amazing kinds of things. As I mentioned earlier, we get environmental sensor anomalies. We have temperature gauges that misread. We have electromagnetic field and geomagnetic field meters that misbehave, radiation meters that go off for no apparent reason when activity is happening. So we get that. We have movement of objects that happens. There is a step stool in the house, just a regular one that you get from Target or Walmart, that has moved locations throughout the house, even though we know that nobody has been in the house in between the times that we visited. So rather amazing things. An entire armoire that was being stored in the attic space moved itself all the way across the attic. And again, we knew for a fact no one else had been in the house, and we could see the drag marks in the dust on the floor. I mentioned olfactory manifestation. That means that scent is a big part. We have areas of the house where a very specific floral scent has been reported. There is also a smell of what's been known as the dirty boy smell, almost like a toddler needs his diaper changed, that has been reported repeatedly up in the attic space. So again, you have these independent witnesses and their reports that over time stack up, and you have to start to wonder what's happening there. Emotional or psychic impressions. I'm one of those people that on my investigations, I use psychics. I treat them just as any other tool that I would gather data from. Emotional outbursts in the house from that just happened at the drop of a hat from I've had grown men who were just there because they're humoring their wives. They're on a ghost tour, you know, they're just there. They didn't want to be there. Grown men in their 40s, their 50s, breaking down and sobbing in certain areas of the house, and they can't explain why. They just know that they're extremely sad, and it just hit them in the gut. And again, we get in this exact same area of the house time and time again over 10 years. So again, something must be happening. And physical sensations. I mentioned the hair tugging or the touching or the pushing. And then, of course, the visual apparitional encounters that I've kind of alluded to and told you about before. So this is what actually goes on in the house. I'll take you on a little tour here, lay out the floor plans for you. We have, you can see the footprint of the cellar, the basement, the first floor, the second floor, and of course, the attic. This is a very large house. It's got a very big footprint, and it's actually easy to get lost in this house, but I'm going to take you on a very quick tour of each of these floors and point out a couple of the things that have happened here. The cellar, as I mentioned, is an area where a lot of activity has gone on, and that we have this very unhappy gentleman who likes to laugh at people and slap them in the basement. So this particular corner is where that gentleman sits, and this is where he stays. We don't know why. We don't know why he's there and why he stays there, but this is the actual location where he is. This is that very same step stool that I've told you that has moved around, not just the basement, but the house itself. I've been in the house where I've been in the basement, I've seen this step stool where it's been upright, just as you see in the photo. And just a little while later, I'll come back down to check on equipment or something like that, and it's been knocked over. It's on its side. As I mentioned, as you can see, there are no furnishings in the house. This is a resonance chamber. Anything that happens in the basement, you can hear up in the attic. You would hear something like that being knocked over. Yet nothing is recorded on our audio recorders. Nothing is seen. Nobody knows how or when it happens. It's just knocked over. So the basement's a very, very interesting place. Of course, there's a lot of standing water in the house because it is below grade, which might explain some of the strange mists and fogs that some people have reported, although that has happened in the middle of summer when it is bone dry in there as well. Here we are taking us all the way up to the attic space now, so you can see that here I am back in the Middle Ages. That's a very old photo of myself walking around. And this is that very same armoire that I told you about. You can see exactly how large and solid that armoire is. That was magically moved, and it did so in the space of 2 weeks. I had been there, I had been in the attic, I had seen where that armoire was. I came back 2 weeks later. I interviewed Shanna. She was the only one with the keys. There was nobody else in the house in that 2 week period of time. And it had moved itself across the attic space. Again, we saw the drag marks on the floor and nobody knew how that actually happened. This is that very light bulb that I was telling you about that Shanna would see go on by itself. And over here is what we call the dog leg. It's just sort of this jog, this little useless space that's over here, where everybody seems to break down in an emotional crisis. Again, I've said that I've had grown men who, big, tough guys who just absolutely lose it when they get into this corner, and we don't know why, but it's always here. And again, these are independent reports. They've not heard stories of the house before. They are just coming in and having these experiences and are pretty shaken up by that because they have no explanation for it. An interesting thing happened in the attic. This is one of my favorite stories about the house. One of my students was a professional sound engineer. It's what he did for a living. And he had the idea that he wanted to mic the entire house. He wanted recording mics on every level of the house. And so we chose a day in September back in 2010, where we knew that there was nothing else going on, at a time of day that we knew would be conducive to having a low sound threshold in and around the house. He brought in all his professional mics. We mic'd the entire house, ran all of the cords up to the attic to the soundboard. We had a video camera. We had this board with all of its lights on it. And the idea was that we were going to leave and lock up the house for 2 hours while everything is recording, come back, break everything down, and then listen to everything and see what we had gotten. Now, I've had several psychics and mediums in the house who have said they believe that there are a couple of children, the ghosts of a couple of children, up in the attic. So if that was true, I thought maybe I can entice them. I brought and left some toys for them. A little choo-choo train and a ball and a little teddy bear. Left them in the attic. These are what we call psychokinetic trigger objects. What I was hoping for was to see them move. If they did, then we'd have it on film. And what I did was, the last thing I said before we left the attic was, to the children, I said, I've brought these toys for you to play with. Please feel free to do so. And we left, we locked up the building, we came back, and lo and behold, everything had been systematically turned off. All of his professional equipment had been, one step after another, bypassed all of the safety features that he had on this thing. And he sent me this email later that basically, I have never had the recorder simply stop creating files. This is all digital, creating files while still giving the indications that it's recording. Basically, this happened in less than a minute after we left the attic. So we were just locking up the building while all of this was going on. So what he said was, I guess we shouldn't have invited anyone to play with the toys, because they saw the thing with all the flashing shiny lights on it and thought, oh, that's more interesting than a teddy bear. So that was a clue to me that in the future I should probably be more specific with my nouns. On the first story, we have all of this beautiful woodwork that you can see throughout the house, and a few things that have gone on. This particular area is where the lady of the house appears when she is seen on the first floor. She's always described as having long blonde hair and wearing a lovely dress, generally in blue or blue-gray. This is looking into the parlor area of the house, where flashes of light, blue light, have been seen both inside the house and from outside the house. People who live and work in town have reported seeing that. The pocket doors that close the parlor off from the main house have closed on their own accord. On one particular occasion, I had a group of students in the house. On our tour, we went through the parlor. The doors were recessed and open. I took them up to the attic, and by the time we came down, they were closed again. And there was nobody else in the house. Everybody was accounted for at the time. Some of the hair pulling and tugging has happened here on the main stairs. Apparitions of a little girl peering through the balustrade have been seen as well. And when you look at her, she sees you looking at her and she runs back up the stairs and disappears. So some interesting things that happen on the first floor. This is an audio recording that I'm going to play for you, so hopefully you'll be able to hear this. It was recorded in the dining room back in 2011. It was myself and one other student, female student. We were both there in the dining room. It was her recorder. We did not hear this at the time that the recording was made. There were a couple of other people back in the kitchen, so you can sort of hear voices happening back there. But this is quite distinct. Let's see what you make of it. I'll play it a couple of times for you. Oops.
Flowers.
Can you make that out? A gentleman's voice, you can hear very close to the microphone saying something. I'll play it again for you.
Flowers.
I'll leave it up to you what you think it is saying. That's the part, the problem with electronic voice phenomena. A lot of people hear different things in it. But I can tell you that there was only one other man in the room. That was me. And I did not say that. Even on my best days, I can't make my voice sound like that. So it's something very interesting happened. Somebody was with us and he was speaking very close to the microphone. And then on the second floor, I've got some evidence for you from the second floor. This seems to be the most active area of the house. It's actually my favorite area of the house to investigate. The surly gentleman, the one that pokes his head out from behind doorways that I was telling you about, he tends to appear in this area here. As you come up the head of the stairs into the hallway, you've got a little servant's hallway here with the stairwell, the servant's stairs, and a joined bathroom here between this bedroom. And it's almost like a little habit trail that he's got. He likes to make this loop going around and around. So he'll poke his head out from behind this door here. Sometimes he's seen here. And again, I've had many students, I've had students say that they saw something, and I'll say, wait a minute, don't tell me what it was. Can you sketch what you've seen? And they'll sketch him out. And it's exactly what I have seen myself. I know what this guy looks like, and they've got him down basically to the detail of the mustache that he has. Very, very interesting things that happen there. So lots of very, very interesting, fun things happen here. I've got a couple more EVP recordings for you. This was in one of the bedrooms on the second floor, that floor that we were just looking at. And let's see, what was this? This was in answer to a question. Two ladies in the house, one on the first floor, one on the second floor. The one on the second floor is the one doing the recording. And they could hear each other. And she was asking a question. and we get a response to that question.
Did you raise your children here?
Yes, I did.
Was that you, Jennifer?
No, I heard it go.
So the question, I believe, was, did you raise your children here? Something along those lines. And we get this.
Did you raise your children here?
Yes, I did.
And what's interesting about this is that this is an acoustic signal. Both these ladies heard the response, and yet it is neither of them. You can hear in the voice, it is neither one of them. So very, very interesting. And they heard this. They heard nothing after that. They just got this one response in the house. I believe we've got two more for you. This is one of my favorites. This was actually recorded in that shared bathroom on the second floor that I showed you. The setup of this was on the very first visit to the house. So this is the very first time I was in the house. I was walking with two other people, one gentleman, one lady. The lady was the one who was doing the recording. As we walked through that bathroom, there is a door leading to a little hallway that I knew, according to the instructions from the property manager, was supposed to be closed. It was standing open. So as we passed, I thought I would be a nice guy, do the Good Samaritan thing, and close the door. And the door was a little sticky. So I had to pull on it, and I gave it a little bit too much of a pull, and it slammed. And of course, you could hear the echo throughout the house. All of us kind of did one of these, I wish I hadn't have done that, but nobody said a word. And we just went on with our tour and investigation of the house. But when we listened to the recording back, right after the slam, we heard this. Let me play that again. Do you hear that? Okay. Always something interesting going on at the Walker Ames house. And I believe here's another one. Yeah, this one was recorded again on the second floor in the hallway area as two investigators were leaving. These were part of my team. They were leaving the second floor area. And again, this was not heard at the time that the recording was being made.
Thank you for your time. This is Neil, and
so to me, I'm not going to tell you what I think it is. I'll play it one more time for you. But what the gist of it is that you've got what sounds like a male voice whispering rather close to the microphone.
thank you for your time. This is Neil, and
so if you can pick that up again, no, there were no men on that floor, and that was not heard at the time that the recording was made. I've got a video clip for you that I want to show you. This was not my clip. This was from another group that I'm very well familiar with. This one's actually been shown on television. If you've ever watched, I think it's called My Ghost Story or something along those lines. This clip was used when they did a segment on Port Gamble. This was an overnight investigation that these people were doing. There are two ladies in this room on the second floor, one here on the floor that you can see in the foreground, and another sacked out on this enormous inflatable bed. Now, I know this person. She's a friend of mine. She's about 5 foot tall. She's a very small woman, all right? In the middle of the night, she was awakened. I'm going to play this for you, and oops, let me try this again. I'm going to play this for you, and what I'd like you to do is keep your eye on the end of the bed here. Bear in mind, she was asleep. Do you see that there is a little bit of movement happening at the end of the bed? I'll back that up and we can see this again. Do you see that? One more time, right here. Now, if you were just looking at this video without any build up to it at all, without any other information, you'd say, so what? She was just moving her foot. She is 5 feet tall. She is curled up in a fetal position. This was her report. Her feet are actually right about here. according to her report. This is just blanket at the end of the bed. So this was not her. What she describes is that she was awakened just prior to the movement at the foot of the bed for no reason. She just woke up and then felt that somebody sat on the edge at the end of the bed, that somebody just very gently sat down. She felt the mattress depress and then lift back up as if the person got off of it. And I said, did you check to see what happened? And she said, are you kidding me? No, I didn't. She said, I basically put the blankets over my head for the rest of the night. Okay, so basically, I've always found this to be very, very interesting. She's a very trustworthy source as far as I'm concerned. And this is a final piece of photographic evidence that I've got to show you. This one really sort of blew my mind. This is, if you remember earlier in the tour, this is from the master bedroom on the second floor. We have this beautiful carved and mirrored fireplace that we're taking a look at. Now, what happened was that there were two men in the house. One of them was the property manager, the new property manager, a guy by the name of Peter Bea. And he had a friend who was a photographer who just wanted to go into the house to photograph the house, the stained glass window, the carvings. There was nothing paranormal about this at all. And so just the two of them, he's taking a photo, he's trying to get a flash effect in the mirror. Pete is standing next to him. They take the series of photos and then they leave. Now, life happened and he didn't go back and take a look at these photos until almost a year later. And when he looked at these photos again a year later, he realized there was something rather odd that he had captured. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw this into a high contrast black and white for you. And I'm going to ask you to look at this and do you see anything unusual in this photo? And when he showed this to me, I said, yeah, I see it. So if you're having trouble, I'm going to circle it for you. This is a figure of someone, this is the outline of someone standing in the doorway down the hall who has seemingly been caught in this particular photograph. Now, remember that I said there were two people in the house and they were both in the room when this photo was taken. The other gentleman was standing right next to the photographer. Neither one of them saw anything at the time that this photo was taken. And I can tell you from my personal experience in the house that this looks an awful lot like that surly gentleman who likes to poke his head out from behind the doors. So again, this is one of those accidental things that happens. They weren't even investigating at the time. And I believe somebody in the house was very curious about what they were doing and they just happened to catch them in the act of checking them out. So there we go. So these are some of the pieces of evidence that I have, okay, that we use to say that we really do believe that there are things going on in this house, and they continue to do so to this day. What I have shown you comes from my own personal experience or sources that I trust, sources that are very, very close to me, and I can vouch for their authenticity and their sincerity and their methods, their methodology. When I take all of the really compelling reports that I've experienced or have very good secondhand information from, and I overlay them throughout the house, that's what each one of these little red X's is, I can start to see that there's a pattern that starts to emerge. For instance, in the basement, in the cellar, you never see anything in the rotunda area down there. You never see anything on this side. Most of it is concentrated in the area where that gentleman has been seen and experienced, and equipment failure over here on this side. It's almost always 100% of the time. Again, you get very few areas outside of the parlor, the kitchen, and the stairway on the first floor. On the second floor, it's almost all in this particular area, and so on. This is what we do when we're doing parapsychological research in the field. We're looking for these patterns, and that's one of the reasons why the Walker Ames House has been such a wonderful resource for myself, as well as a number of other groups and individuals who are also in the investigative field. Because when we compile all of these together, we start to see these patterns that emerge. And this is exactly the kind of thing, the kind of data that we look for to let us say, we may not be able to say conclusively that what's going on in the house is paranormal, but there is something going on in the house. It's in these areas, and it's consistent over 10, 15, 20 years worth of data collection, which anecdotally, that's pretty important, and it's also pretty compelling to my way of thinking. I will continue to investigate the Walker Ames house as long as they allow me in town, as well as the other buildings that are there. I think probably when I die, if I come back as a ghost, I will more than likely haunt Port Gamble because I feel so strongly about the town and its residents, and I'm already familiar. I've already got friends there who are on the other side. The town itself continues to be very, very popular, both with tourism as well as the paranormal tourism that happens. As I mentioned, every October, November, we have the annual Port Gamble Ghost Conference. So if you're interested in that, this last year, of course, we had to do it virtually. We did a virtual conference, and we might do parts of it again next year. So if you're interested, keep an eye out, go to portgamble.com, and you can find out a little bit more as we get closer to that in the year. Just before we wrap up here, I'd like to thank the people that sort of made this possible. Again, Life After Life Club and Marion, thank you very much. And Alan out there, thank you also as well as the town of Port Gamble and Shanna Smith and Peter Orbea and everybody else who has contributed to this particular presentation. If you're interested in what I do outside of this or in addition to this, you can find me at paranormalstudies.org, paranormalstudies.org. You can also find me on Facebook under the same, Paranormal Studies. I do have a DVD that I put out in 2012 that's an educational DVD on parapsychology called Dark and Stormy Nights, Parapsychology for Ghost Hunters. You might find that interesting. And I'm also involved in a couple of other projects. I'm also doing a long-term investigative study on the Oregon coast at a hotel known as the Old Wheeler Hotel, which is the subject of an upcoming documentary film called The Permanence, a Paranormal Case Study. So you can go to thepermanencefilm.com if you want information on that, a beautiful hotel down there. And as I mentioned at the beginning, one of my new things that I'm doing now is offering tarot readings online or by phone. So if you're interested in that, you can visit me at journeyworktarot.com. So I think that's it for me as far as presentation goes, and I'm happy to answer any questions that we have at this point.
Can you hear me, Neil?
Yes, I can.
Okay, this is Liz McAdams. I had the pleasure of meeting you a few years ago up at the Parapsychological Association.
I recall. It's really nice to talk with you again.
We're so delighted that you're here and that you've spoken for us, and it was so very interesting.
Well, thank you.
I wanted to ask you something, please. As you know, a lot of the reports from near-death experiencers say that the deceased they see are not looking the way they did when they passed. They have a much younger presence. And I'm wondering if you have any information about that.
It's an interesting phenomenon. Thanks for bringing it up. It's an interesting phenomenon that is observed, that oftentimes we see the deceased, again, not at the time or even around the time that they died, but
Yes.
sort of in their prime, as it were. And I believe, and there is some evidence that in parapsychology that sort of supports this idea, when we're actually seeing an apparition, there is no physical being there. It's not an actual go up and touch it and have it be flesh and blood, even though you might perceive it that way. As I mentioned earlier, most apparitions are seen as solid. That's because it's sort of a hallucination. The information that the ghost is generating is what our brain is interpreting and putting in front of our little video screen here, our eyes, to say that there's an actual physical thing right there. So for those people who experience a ghost of somebody that they knew,
Yes,
they're going to remember them probably as you see somebody in your mind. It's like I do a little experiment with my students. If we close our eyes and we think about ourselves, you get an image of yourself in your mind. You're
Yes.
probably a little younger. You're probably have taken off a few pounds, you know, as we all wish we could do. You're sort of an idealized image of yourself. And I believe that that's what we're actually seeing when we have these experiences. There are some very interesting reports that I've encountered of ghosts being seen at various stages of their lives. Same ghost, but they're seen as a child. And then they're seen when they're in their teens, and then they're seen when they're 50. All the same ghost, all in the same location. It's just like they're on a continuum or a spectrum, and we just happen to be dropping in visually on that era of their life. So very, very interesting idea. I think
Yes,
that's
that
probably
is.
what's going on.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. I have a question, Neil.
Yes,
This is
Janice.
Janice. Just in general, because you're the ghost expert, in my opinion. Are ghosts stuck here on this, in between the physical plane and what they say, go to the light?
Yeah. I'm not one who holds to that idea. I know it's a very popular idea that they're stuck, that they're in a loop, that they can't find the light. I think that that's probably true for some. More than likely, those are the ones that passed away in really confused circumstances, possibly. But most of the ghosts that I've met know exactly what they're doing. They know where they are. They may not know when they are, but most of them know that they are dead. And they're hanging around for a particular reason. If we look at folklore is really important to paranormal investigation. Not enough attention is paid to it. Folklorists have done us a really great service in looking at ghost stories and categorizing what ghosts do in these urban legends. And it turns out that there are usually 6 or 7 different motivations that a ghost might have for hanging around. And that's usually because of unfinished business, because they like where they're haunting. Maybe it was their house or their favorite place on earth. There's any number of reasons why a ghost might stick around. But when you look at the parapsychological literature, the reports, when we do get the idea of why the ghost is hanging around, it's because they want to be there. In most cases, I believe that they could actually move on if they wanted to. But for whatever reason, they like it here right now. So.
Yeah, I've also heard that it's due to a very traumatic death, that they're in between. It's like they're not accepting it.
And that's possible. Like I said, you know, that they might be confused. They're not exactly sure what's going on. Nobody's explained to them that they really are dead, or it happened in a location, maybe a suicide or something like that, out away from people, so they don't get the sense that time has moved on. And that they are stuck. So, you know, we really don't know what actually motivates the ghosts, but every chance I get, I ask them.
Okay. That would be, I was going to say, maybe you could find them. Have you heard of the Boulder Hotel in Boulder, Colorado?
I have not heard of the
My
Boulder
son-in-law
Hotel.
has an office there in
Okay.
Boulder. So when he travels there without his family, because they won't stay there, he stays at the Boulder Hotel. It's a very, I think it might be Victorian. It's very old.
Okay.
And he swears there are ghosts there. So
Well,
I'll
if
have
he
to tell
swears,
him.
then I'm sure there must be something to it.
Yeah, he's the only one I can talk to in the family about it.
Oh, I understand. Yeah, I do understand.
Yeah.
I hear
And-
that a lot.
And the Mohawk Lodge or Mountain House in New York, have you heard of that?
I have, but I'm not familiar with
I actually stayed there.
the phenomena. Yeah.
You know, I just think, without any research, I think that old places have old energy.
I think that's definitely true in the case of hauntings when there are recordings. And I think for apparitions, you know, there's just a sense of this is familiar, a sense of familiarity. if I could haunt my own house, I probably would, because I love it here. Because
I'd like to
it's
haunt some
familiar.
people.
Could do that too. Well, that's happened on a few occasions. I've known a couple of traveling ghosts.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you very
Sure.
much for your talk.
My pleasure. Is there any other questions at this point? Well, then I'll thank you all for joining, and thanks again for having me here. I'm glad that we could finally make this work, and I'm very happy to have been able to be here with you today. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Absolutely.
so much.
I had one. I was trying to get unmuted.
Oh, sure. Please do.
Oh,
Please
sorry. I'm new to this. With apparitions,
Yes.
we don't have an old house or anything to that, but repeatedly, if they keep appearing,
Mm-hmm.
and there's bright lights, and trying to figure out what is trying to be communicated, is there, and then also how do you kind of prevent it so that you can get some rest at times?
If you're able to determine that it's interactive, if it interacts with you, then you're dealing with an apparition, right?
Okay.
As we talked about before. So if it's
Right.
communicating
Nice
with you, if it's
outside.
interactive,
Okay.
okay. So it's basically like having a house
gonna-
guest.
I have a question in a minute.
You can ask that ghost to leave.
Oh,
Okay.
In my experience, most ghosts are actually pretty respectful if you set down the rules. If you say, I understand you're here, but this is my house, or this is where I live now, and I'm the one paying the rent, or I'm the one paying the mortgage, and you set down some boundaries for them, 9 times out of 10, I know it sounds silly, but 9 times out of 10, you'll find that you get a pretty decent response with that. And the activity will either slow down or stop. So you can kind of work with them on that level. If they're being disruptive and they're not answering that, then give me a call, and we can work out a couple of things. If you figure out that it's a haunting, if it's just a recording on the environment and it's not interacting, I see you, Anita. I'll be with you in just a moment. But if you see that it's a haunting, because it's a recording on the environment, change the environment. Move the furniture, have a party with a lot of music and activity, change the energy in the environment. When you do that, that disrupts, it's sort of like peeling the psychic wallpaper off the walls, basically, is what we're doing. We're changing the environment.
We've tried that, and
Okay.
then things will be okay for a few days, and then it's like it readjusts to the new environment.
Oh, okay. So maybe what we'll do is outside of the chat here, we could talk about that. If you want to email me,
Okay.
or if you want to give me a call, please do that, and we'll talk about alternatives. I'll need a few more details from you before we can
Gladly
kind of
share those.
figure out
Yes.
a better way of going about it. Sure, no
Okay.
problem.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Anita, what was your question?
I was a psychologist, and then I became an airline pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that after studying all many transportation obliterations, whether it's train, plane, car, etc., that there are certain people that have spirits that have reported things that they saw that perhaps other people outside of the aircraft or whatever vehicle did not see. And I've just always felt very akin to them, because it's really special to be able to fly at 40,000 over the globe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially if you've got a ghost on
That's
the plane
right.
with you.
Right.
It's yeah, there are a lot, actually. It doesn't have to be just a location. We usually think of the haunted house as being the thing that we associate with apparitions, but there are so many reports of haunted or I should say ghosts on airplanes and on trains and in cars and you know, hitchhikers and even snowmobiles and things like that. It's basically anywhere you can imagine, there's probably a story of an apparition having appeared there. In fact, there's, I'm trying to remember the flight number now, it escapes me at the moment, but there have been World War II planes where that they're still in service as for tourism purposes, where you can walk through the plane or sit in the cockpit and things like that, where the pilots are seen still. There's an aircraft carrier at Alameda in the Bay Area, the USS Hornet, that is lousy with apparitions there from its long, rich history in the military. So, you know, vehicles are a prime target for apparitions, it seems.
Sure.
Quite a few.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure. My pleasure.
I'll be in touch.
Good. Good.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. I think that's it. And as always, if you have questions afterwards or want to contact me, please feel free to do so. You can either give me a call or find me on Facebook, or probably the easiest way to do it is go through paranormalstudies.org, which has all of my contact information, and I'm happy to take a little time and talk with you. All right.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, happy hauntings to everybody, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We enjoyed that.
Blessings.